Hey, what's up everybody, and welcome back to News Dose. And over the last couple years, there's been a lot of rumors when it comes to the Nintendo Switch Pro. This is something that we've talked about a lot on this channel, and well, earlier this year they did announce a new Nintendo Switch revision, though it was actually the Nintendo Switch OLED. Not exactly what people were expecting, as there was no real internal changes. However, since then, rumors have died down just a little bit, but well, they're actually back in full steam this time, but instead of a Switch revision, we're actually hearing now about a possible Nintendo Switch successor. Yeah, that's right, so we will be talking about that later today, plus a big next-generation only game for the PlayStation 5 and the Xbox Series is reportedly in development. Before we get to all that, though, we do need to go over some of the quick stuff first, and we'll start today off with the Nintendo 64 expansion. This is something that they did reveal last month at that Nintendo Direct, and a lot of fans were really excited about this. Nintendo was finally expanding Nintendo Switch Online to include Nintendo 64 games, and there's actually some really exciting games coming to this service, including Banjo-Kazooie, we saw Mario 64, and even Paper Mario. It looks like some really good games will be included in this service, but when they originally announced it, they didn't reveal the pricing. But, well, that's actually changed today. The pricing is now set in stone, and they also announced some of the benefits that comes with Nintendo Switch Online Plus Expansion Pack, which is a ridiculous name, but we're not going to get into all of that today. But yes, it is now set for $50 a year. Now that's actually quite a price hike there. If you just get the standard Nintendo Switch Online, that's only $20, so this is over double the price for Nintendo 64 games. And fans right now do not seem thrilled at all about the price that they're asking for this expansion pack. Now, Nintendo did try to throw in some other benefits to kind of justify the price tag here. Of course, you do have Sega Genesis games, though I have a feeling that the license for those games is actually one of the reasons the price did increase so much with this expansion pack, but they're also going to try to include free DLC at no extra cost with this service. One such example is Animal Crossing New Horizons Happy Home Paradise. If you do not have Nintendo Switch Online Plus Expansion Pack, you will have to pay for that, but if you have the subscription, this will come at no extra cost. So that's a nice little extra benefit, but whether or not it actually justifies the price, that is debatable to say the least. Now, we did also get the price for the Nintendo 64 controller, which is set at $50, and pre-orders did go live today. Unfortunately, it is temporarily out of stock, but I would say to just kind of remain patient on this. Don't pay scalpers, because this device will come back in stock. It's just about being patient by this point. Now, we also got some news on the Xbox version for Final Fantasy XIV. The Xbox Final Fantasy XIV version has been such a weird topic because about 2 years ago, Phil Spencer pretty much said that an Xbox version was going to happen over at XO19, and since then, we haven't really heard much about that Xbox version. So what exactly is happening with this game? Now, earlier this year, Yoshida kind of made it sound like it's a resource issue and that they're just kind of focusing on other things right now, which is actually very possible when you start to think about it. They just got that PlayStation 5 update out, and they're also focusing on the Endwalker expansion, so they do have a lot going on with Final Fantasy XIV. But obviously, Xbox is going to want this game, and it does sound like Square Enix wants it to happen as well. If you take a look here, in an interview with Easy Allies, Yoshida had this to say: "We are still in discussions with Microsoft, and I feel like our discussions are going in a positive-like tone. I don't want to say we do not have an Xbox version, but I'm hoping that the timing will be very soon that I will have some kind of update to the players." Now, that is a really interesting statement because he flat out says that I don't want to say we do not have an Xbox version. Reading between the lines there, it very much does sound like there is absolutely an Xbox version, and it's just a matter of when rather than if by this point. Hopefully it's sooner rather than later. This is a really popular MMO, of course, from a very popular franchise. A lot of its fan base also views this as one of the best entries in the entire franchise. So, this is a big game, and Xbox absolutely needs it. What I will say, though, is that it does sound like the Xbox version is getting closer to being released, and when it does eventually happen, there's going to be a lot of content there day one. We're talking hundreds of hours with all the expansions in Final Fantasy XIV. Let's go ahead and talk about the Nintendo Switch though, as over the last couple years, there has been a lot of rumors when it comes to a quote-unquote Nintendo Switch Pro. This is supposed to be some kind of 4K device that uses DLSS 2.0, and reportedly earlier this year, it was set for a 2021 release. Instead of that though, we got the Switch OLED, which didn't really change any of the internal hardware. Much of the community was disappointed with that, but now those rumors are starting to come back, but rather than a quote-unquote Switch Pro, we're actually talking about a Nintendo Switch Successor now. Yeah, this is according to the Nintendo insider Nate Drake, which has proven to be relatively reliable in the past, and he claims that what was originally supposed to be a Nintendo Switch Pro has actually transformed in mid-production, becoming more of a successor with the Switch 2. A Super Switch, as you will. Though Nate Drake does mention that he doesn't know if Nintendo will advertise this as a Switch successor or just simply a Switch revision. What he does say, though, is that this device will have some exclusive titles that are not available on the original Switch, and that's probably one of the reasons that we're kind of looking at a successor here. This apparently will be a 4K device that's achieved through DLSS. This is actually something that we've heard a lot about over the last year, but once again, it does sound like that will be the case. And because of that, there will be exclusive titles for this Switch. Now, whether or not it's a revision, again, that's going to be kind of up for debate, because if you take a look at the new 3DS as an example, that device also had a few exclusive titles such as Xenoblade Chronicles, and that technically wasn't really a successor. So we'll kind of see what happens with all that. Now, something else that he does mention is that some developers and big publishers have gotten dev kits late in 2020, and some games might be ready by late 2022. And that's actually what he's been hearing will be the release date. It'll be either late 22 or early 2023. And that is really soon, especially considering we just got a Nintendo Switch revision with the OLED model. I think for some people out there, if this does end up being true, that might be a little upsetting that maybe they went ahead and upgraded to the Switch OLED, and then like a year later, then you get that big Switch revision or a Switch successor. That could be a little disappointing for some fans out there, but one thing that we have seen with Nintendo in the past is they're not afraid of pumping out revisions. You take a look at the 3DS, I mean, you had the original 3DS, you had the 3DXL, you had the 2DS, you had the new 3DS, and then the new 2DS. So, I mean, they're not afraid of pumping out devices. I mean, even with the Nintendo Switch, if you think about it, we've gotten 3 devices in 4 years. So again, they're not afraid of pumping out new devices like this. And really, the further that we do get out, it does make sense to kind of move on to a Nintendo Switch successor if that is something that they're leaning towards. I mean, the Nintendo Switch is just such a phenomenal device, and I do think that they need to stay on this path of having this hybrid console. Nintendo's always excelled when it comes to handhelds, and the Switch really just reflects how good they are at making these style of games. But, you know, the big thing right now is that they're kind of falling behind when it comes to the Xbox Series and then the PlayStation 5. They're starting to lose out on some of that third-party support because the Switch is just not powerful enough to get some of these games. And that's where a Switch successor could really be beneficial. We could start to see more big third-party games head over to the Switch with some extra power. Now, one thing that has kind of been brought up is the question of backwards compatibility. Apparently, some data miners have suggested that a Switch 4K or successor will have some challenges with natively backwards compatible games, but it does sound like Nintendo has options to pursue backwards compatibility. Hopefully, if that is true, they do figure out how to make that work before the official announcement. Again, if all of this is even true. That is the most important part to keep in mind here. All of this is just rumors for the time being, and nothing is confirmed just yet. As we've seen a lot in the last couple years when it comes to these Nintendo Switch revisions, or in this case with a successor, not everything always pans out the way you think it will happen. What I'm going to leave on, though, is that the timing of all of this actually is pretty consistent with Nintendo's history. Nintendo does typically release a new console about every 5 or 6 years, and if this does come out in 2022 or 2023, it fits that pretty perfectly. So I guess we'll just kind of see what happens. Now, since we're talking about next-generation consoles, we need to talk about the Xbox Series and the PlayStation 5. One thing that we have seen a lot this generation so far is cross-generation games, meaning that most games that has released over the last year has been available on the Xbox Series, Xbox One, and the PlayStation 5 and the PlayStation 4. However, reportedly, a big game from a beloved franchise will only be heading to the Xbox Series, PlayStation 5, and PC, being Dragon Age 4. Yeah, Dragon Age is a highly anticipated RPG that fans have been waiting for a very long time. I mean, Dragon Age Inquisition released way back in 2014, so fans have been waiting a little while for this game. But it does sound like this will be a next-generation only game. Now, this hasn't officially been announced yet, but this is actually because of two separate sources. One would be from a LinkedIn profile from the lead player designer for Dragon Age 4, and apparently it only makes mention of the PlayStation 5, Xbox Series, and PC. So that's already a pretty good sign that this will be a next generation only game. But now we also have VentureBeat, which apparently has confirmed from their own sources that yes, it will not be available on the PlayStation 4 and the Xbox One. This really is to be expected though, because the further we get into this generation, the less games you'll see support the Xbox One and the PlayStation 4. These consoles are now actually 8 years old, which is almost hard to believe, but that is the case. The Xbox One and the PlayStation 4 launched back in 2013. And starting in 2022, we are going to start to see more and more next generation only games. And that's kind of the thing when it comes to Dragon Age 4. This game is very likely not going to release until after 2022, so it really does make sense for this to be a next generation only game that can really take advantage of the power of these next generation consoles. And then on top of that, I mean, this is BioWare we're talking about. BioWare's most recent releases have been more than just a little bit criticized. Of course, there was Anthem and then Mass Effect Andromeda, both of which weren't exactly received well. So they really need a successful game this generation, which means they need to be both good in quality as well as be successful financially. That's going to be important because there is a real fear when it comes to BioWare. BioWare has this rich history of making great RPGs, but with their last couple games, they have definitely struggled. So with them focusing on less consoles, maybe they can release this game with less bugs right out of the gate and just really focus on the quality of these next generation only titles. We are definitely starting to see a trend here with these 2022 and beyond titles. EA did also announce that Dead Space Remake is a next generation only title, and now we're also hearing that that's very well possibly the same for Dragon Age 4. Now, before I go, we do need to talk about one more thing, and this obviously is the most important piece of news today, and that is the Xbox Series X refrigerator. Now, the thing about the Xbox Series X is when this thing first got announced, there was this ongoing joke that this console looks like a refrigerator, and Microsoft really handled this well, and they just kind of leaned into the idea that yes, this console looks like a refrigerator. They posted several jokes about it themselves, and they even made a full-size refrigerator for people like Snoop Dogg. But well, now they're actually making that a reality for the community as well with an Xbox Series X mini refrigerator. It does have a release window now being December, and pre-orders will go live on October 19th. And the cool thing about this thing is that the price is actually pretty good here. I thought this thing was going to probably be at least $200, but actually it's only going to be $99. So I think the pricing is really well done here, and don't be surprised if this thing sells out really quick. And that's one of the things that I do want to caution against. Do not buy this from scalpers, because just like I said earlier with the Nintendo 64 controller, be patient. They do note in the official statement that this is only the first wave. So just be patient, and I'm sure this will get more stock as time goes on. With that said though, I mean, this is a really cool collector's piece, and I will leave a link in the description below for all of the regions that will be getting this initially and what retailers you can pick it up at. Let's go and take a look at the poll of the day though, and with as much news as we've gotten this week for Final Fantasy XIV, I wanted to ask you all, have you all actually played this game? And the results here was actually quite shocking. If you take a look here, only 15% of you have played this game even just a little bit, while 82% of you said you've never played it at all. That surprised me a little bit considering just how successful Final Fantasy XIV is. This is one of the most popular MMOs out there, and they did announce that it's reached 24 million players earlier this week. Even then though, the results here really kind of just shows what I was talking about earlier. This game still has so much room to grow, and by bringing it to other platforms such as Xbox, it could bring even more players to Final Fantasy XIV. I do understand though that it is quite intimidating to jump into a game like this, just considering how much content it has. It is a big time investment, but Final Fantasy XIV has always been praised for feeling like a single player game, especially when it comes to its expansions. That's where the community really praises Final Fantasy XIV, and if they continue to be praised for that, I can only see more and more players jumping into a game like this. Anyways though, that's it for this episode, but if you liked the video, don't forget to bell notification and subscribe button for more content just like this. Also, if you'd like to support the channel through Patreon, thank you for making this content possible. Peace out.